Have you always felt different? From a very young age, did something inside you just not quite mesh with the world around you? It's like the other kids were content with things that simply didn't make sense to you. You felt things that no one else seemed to acknowledge. You asked questions that the adults in your life couldn't or wouldn't answer. If that resonates with your childhood experience, what I'm about to reveal in this video might finally explain what you've always known deep down, but could never quite put into words. Eckhart Tolle teaches that some people are born with a more awakened consciousness, and there are specific signs in childhood that reveal this. Signs that most people dismiss as oversensitivity or a fertile imagination, but that actually indicates something much more profound. Before I reveal these 5 signs, I need to warn you about something important. Recognizing these signs in yourself isn't about feeling special or superior. It's about finally understanding experiences that may have been confusing or even painful. It's about validating a part of yourself that may have been invalidated for far too long. Tolle shared something truly eye-opening about his own childhood and about children in general. There are more children being born nowadays who may not have to go through the deep unconsciousness that adults have had to go through, certainly that I had to go through, and there are also more children being born to parents who are in the process of awakening. Did you catch that? There are souls that arrive in this world with an already elevated consciousness. And there are clear signs of this in childhood. Research in psychology confirms this in fascinating ways. Studies on highly sensitive children show that these individuals are characterized by a deeper processing of stimuli, increased sensory sensitivity, a tendency toward overstimulation, and intensified emotional reactivity. These children respond more acutely to their environment, in ways that can be both a blessing and a curse, depending on the context. Scientists sometimes refer to them as orchid children versus dandelion children. Orchid children are extremely sensitive to their environment. They flourish magnificently in nurturing environments, but suffer deeply in negative ones. Dandelion children are more resilient and adapt readily to almost any circumstance. If you were an orchid child, you likely carry the signs of a more awakened soul. Now let me reveal the first sign. The first sign is that you felt things that others didn't feel. From a very young age, you perceived atmospheres. You could walk into a room and immediately sense if something was wrong, even if no one said a word. You could look at people and feel what they were feeling inside, even when they were smiling on the outside. This wasn't imagination. It was an energetic and emotional sensitivity that most children simply don't possess. Tolle explains that this sensitivity is a sign of more developed consciousness. When you are more present, more aware, you naturally perceive more. You pick up on subtle cues that pass unnoticed by those lost in their thoughts. Research in psychology shows that highly sensitive children possess what scientists call sensory processing sensitivity. This includes deeper processing of stimuli, heightened awareness of subtleties in the environment, and more intense emotional responses. If you were the child who sensed when your parents were sad, even when they pretended to be fine, if you perceived tension in environments before anything was said, if you felt the pain of other children as if it were your own, that's a clear sign. This sensitivity may have been confusing or even painful. You probably didn't understand why you felt so much, why everything seemed so intense, why the world sometimes felt too heavy. But now you can understand. This sensitivity was a sign of a more awakened consciousness, trying to navigate a world that still operates largely in unconsciousness. The second sign is that you felt profoundly different and out of place. You looked at the other kids and didn't understand how they could be interested in things that seemed so empty. You tried to fit in, but something always felt off. There was a persistent feeling of not belonging. This wasn't shyness or a lack of social skills. It was a fundamental difference in the way you perceived and processed reality. Tolle describes this phenomenon in adults who are awakening. Many people who are going through the early stages of the awakening process are no longer sure what their outer purpose is. What moves the world no longer moves them. Seeing the insanity of our civilization so clearly, they feel somewhat alienated from the culture around them. But for some souls, this displacement begins long before adulthood. It starts in childhood. If you felt like an alien in your own family, if the interests of other children seemed superficial or bewildering to you, if you preferred to be alone thinking or observing rather than participating in boisterous games, that's a sign. Research shows that highly sensitive children often feel different from their peers. They may have difficulty connecting with children who don't share their emotional depth or their way of processing the world. This feeling of not belonging may have caused pain. It may have made you question what was wrong with you. But the truth is, there was nothing wrong. You simply operated on a different frequency. The third sign is that you asked profound questions from a very early age. While other kids were asking why the sky is blue, you were asking why we exist. While other kids were preoccupied with toys, you were wondering what happens after we die. You had an existential curiosity that surprised and sometimes disturbed the adults. Tolle refused all forms of formal education between the ages of 13 and 22, preferring to pursue his own creative and philosophical interests. At age 15, he was deeply influenced by spiritual books by the German mystic Joseph Anton Schneider-Franken. This search for deeper meaning from an early age is a classic sign of an awakened soul. If you thought about death when you were a child, if you questioned rules that seemed arbitrary, if you felt that there was something more beyond what the adults were telling you, if you had a sense that life had a greater purpose that no one could quite explain, that's a sign. These questions weren't morbid or problematic. They were signs of a consciousness trying to understand the nature of existence, a soul that already came with a philosophical restlessness built in. The fourth sign is that you were intensely affected by conflicts and negativity. Arguments between your parents, they devastated you. Conflicts at school, they made you physically ill. You absorbed the negativity around you like a sponge, and you didn't know how to protect yourself. This goes beyond simply disliking conflict. It's a sensitivity so profound that other people's negativity becomes your own pain. Eckhart Tolle teaches that the most powerful teaching isn't what you say or do for children, but your state of consciousness at home. That's the fundamental basis for teaching your children. Awakened souls as children, they feel this in an amplified way. They don't just observe the state of consciousness of their parents, they absorb it. They live it. Research in psychology documents this as part of the orchid child experience. They respond more intensely to both positive and negative environments. In negative environments, they suffer more than other children. But in positive environments, they flourish more than other children. If you were the child who got sick when there was tension at home, if you felt anxiety in conflict situations even when it wasn't directed at you, if you cried over injustices you saw in the world, this is a sign. This sensitivity to negativity might have been very difficult to carry, but it's also a sign of a consciousness that naturally recognizes suffering and desires to transmute it. The fifth sign is that you had a natural connection with something larger. Maybe you talked to the universe before you knew what meditation was. Maybe you sensed presences that others didn't see. Maybe you had a natural faith in something transcendent. Even if your family wasn't religious, maybe nature called to you in ways that went beyond simple aesthetic pleasure. This innate connection with deeper dimensions of reality is a classic sign of an awakened soul. Tolle explains that as a child, a person builds a sense of ego. The child has a name, has a self, has a mind. But then, to awaken, a person needs to completely transcend that sense of ego. Some children already come with this transcendence partially present. They have an ego like any child, but they also have frequent glimpses of what exists beyond the ego. Research in psychology shows that highly sensitive children often report experiences they describe as spiritual or transcendent. Practices like contemplation, meditation, or simply being silent in nature are described as the most essential form of rest for highly sensitive people. If you had moments of profound peace contemplating nature when you were a child, if you felt a connection to something larger that you couldn't explain, if you had strong intuitions that frequently came true, if you felt that there was an intelligence or presence guiding your life, this is a sign. This connection may have been invalidated by the adults around you. They might have said it was imagination or fantasy, but you knew, on some deep level, that it was real. Now that you know these 5 signs, let me show you what they mean for your current life. First, understand that your sensitivity isn't a weakness. It's a capacity. Tolle teaches that in the new earth, as awakened consciousness enters, the ego will develop in children and will quickly be overcome when they reach adulthood. The ego is an immature stage of development for humans, and that's what will be recognized when consciousness shifts on the planet. Your childhood sensitivity was a sign that you came prepared for this shift in consciousness. You don't need to harden yourself or close yourself off. You need to learn how to use your sensitivity with awareness. Second, recognize that the suffering of childhood had a purpose. Research in transpersonal psychology shows that while trauma injures the body, the brain, and the capacity for emotional regulation, it also injures the soul. Organizations have created the term soul wound to describe this spiritual dimension of trauma. But here's something important. Many of the conditions currently diagnosed as problematic are actually difficult stages of a radical transformation of personality and of spiritual opening. If correctly understood and supported, these psycho-spiritual crises can result in emotional and psychosomatic healing, remarkable psychological transformation, and evolution of consciousness. Your childhood suffering was not in vain. It prepared you for something larger. Third, use your story for post-traumatic growth. Research from 2024 shows that people with a strong sense of spirituality may be more inclined to engage in meaning-making processes that can help them reframe their experiences of childhood maltreatment in ways that promote growth. This is called post-traumatic growth, and highly sensitive people have a unique capacity for it. The same traits that make you more vulnerable to the impacts of generational trauma, your depth of processing, emotional responsiveness, and intuitive awareness, are powerful assets in the healing process. When channeled with intention, your highly sensitive nature becomes a bridge not only to your own healing, but potentially to healing across generations. Fourth, forgive your parents and caregivers. Tolle admits about his own childhood. I loved my parents, but they were deeply unconscious. Most parents have awakened souls as children. They didn't have the tools to deal with the sensitivity of their children. They didn't understand what was happening. They reacted from their own unconsciousness. This doesn't justify any harm they may have caused, but it offers understanding. And understanding is the first step toward forgiveness. And forgiveness is what frees you from the weight of the past. Fifth, honor the child that you were, that sensitive, different child who asked strange questions and felt too much. She deserves to be honored. She carried something precious through often difficult circumstances. She kept a flame of consciousness lit, even when the world tried to extinguish it. Tolle teaches that the question is how to help children remain relatively conscious so that they are not drawn into the mass unconsciousness that still permeates mass culture. And the technology that promotes unconsciousness and addictive behavior, you did it, maybe with difficulty, maybe with scars, but you maintained your consciousness, and now you can cultivate it consciously. You've just discovered the 5 childhood signs that indicate an awakened soul. This truth has been ignored because most people dismiss sensitivity as weakness and depth as eccentricity. When you click on Super Thanks, you become a guardian of this understanding about the nature of awakened souls. It's not payment, it's positioning. You've chosen to honor your own journey. Now, I want to leave you with a concrete practice that you can apply immediately. Over the next few days, set aside a moment to connect with the child you once were. Close your eyes and visualize yourself at the age when you felt that difference most strongly, that displacement, that sensitivity. Tell that child what they needed to hear back then. Tell them they weren't wrong, that their sensitivity was a gift, that their questions were important, that they belonged, even if it didn't seem that way. This simple practice can initiate a profound process of integration and healing. You are reconnecting parts of yourself that may have been fragmented or denied. Remember what Eckhart Tolle teaches about the future. In a new earth, the ego will develop in children and will quickly be surpassed when they reach adulthood. The ego is an immature stage of development for humans. You came to be part of that change. The signs were there from the beginning. Your sensitivity, your displacement, your questions, your pain with negativity, your connection with something larger. All of these were indicators of an awakened soul arriving. Now your job is to honor that soul, to continue its awakening, and perhaps to help other sensitive children not have to struggle as much as you did, because that's Eckhart Tolle's promise. There are more children being born now who may not have to go through the deep unconsciousness that we had to go through. And some of those children may need you, your understanding and your validation to flourish. The 5 childhood signs that reveal an awakened soul are clear. Feeling what others didn't feel, feeling profoundly different, asking existential questions early on, being intensely affected by negativity, having a natural connection with something larger. If you recognized yourself in these signs, now you know. You were always different, not because something was wrong with you, but because something was very right. Controversial take. Tolle teaches that some souls are born with a more awakened consciousness, and that there are more children like this being born now. This means that awakening isn't just the result of spiritual practice, but also something that comes with the soul. Do you agree or disagree? Comment below which of the 5 signs you most recognized in your childhood. I'll respond to everyone in the first 2 hours.